Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues brings expert guests to the airwaves to talk through your divorce questions and fill in the gray areas about separating. From thinking about divorce to how to behave during divorce to what to do after, this is Divorce Dialogue. Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. I'm the founder of the Miller Law Group and a trainer at the Center for Understanding and Conflict, and I am on a mission to change how people divorce and help them divorce with dignity. And my guest today is Rabbi Shlomo Slatkin. He's a marriage therapist, author, and he's the founder of the Marriage Restoration Project, where he helps couples on the brink of separation rediscover connection and purpose. He's drawing on 2 decades of experience and a deep belief that breakdowns are often, or I guess can be, breakthroughs. And he now brings his relationship repair tools into both homes and boardrooms. Welcome, Rabbi Slatkin. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, and I was telling you when we were preparing for the show that I got your newsletter about your marriage workshops, and I thought that it would be really intriguing to have you on the show. And I love what you say in your bio about how breakdowns can be, well, you don't exactly say this, but are invitations, not necessarily failures. And so can you tell us what you mean about that and maybe give us an example where a couple or a team experienced that kind of transformation?
Sure. We said people like to think when they get into a relationship that it's all going to be a bunch of roses, but what we know in this field is that relationships start off with a romantic phase, but they inevitably enter a power struggle, and that's normal. And instead of kind of squirming and just like resisting it, trying to understand that the power struggle can be an opportunity for and even for a breakthrough, that the conflict is an opportunity for connection. It's just the question is how do we look at the situation and how do we get really beneath the surface to understand what's really going on. So we see this, I've seen this all the time with couples that they're coming in feeling kind of pessimistic about their relationship. And as they begin to explore the conflict that they're having and they begin to understand how it's related actually to their own baggage that they bring to the relationship from the past, from childhood or previous relationships, and how that it's actually triggering the same issues for them, they start to realize, wow, this is actually an opportunity for me to work on my own issues, and that I'm really almost attracting this into my life and leaving this relationship. If I'm not aware of it, I'm likely to find someone similar. So once I become aware of that, once I become conscious, I can have an opportunity to transform the relationship. And instead of getting locked in that power struggle, you can create what we call a conscious relationship, where you can both be aware of what's going on, have more freedom to choose your reaction, and be more intentional.
You know, have you ever heard that the Chinese character for conflict is a combination of the character for crisis and the character for opportunity?
Oh, that's
It,
neat.
it,
Yeah.
it turns out that's not true, but
Uh,
I still love the idea, right? That conflict is crisis mixed in with opportunity. And when you really see that and I think this is what you're saying, so let me know if you agree with this, Rabbi Slatkin, is if you are willing to change your own reaction and try something different, that maybe there's an opportunity in there for something that you weren't expecting.
yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that because we find the more that we explore the conflict, the more we realize it's not just kind of an accident that we're in this situation or our bad luck. We see that it's really exactly what we need to grow. So really what our partner needs most from us that's bothering them, that's hurting them, is a thing that we actually need to grow. So like I'll just give you an example as we're talking kind of in
Sure.
let's say that you're married to someone who has a hard time listening and they keep complaining, oh, you don't really hear me, you don't understand. Well, it could be that often is the case that you might have a hard time listening. It could be true. And that their need to feel heard, which is based on their own childhood wounding, is an opportunity for you to grow and meet that kind of part of your personality that you didn't fully develop for whatever reason. Could also be from a childhood situation. So I'm thinking about a couple where, the husband never felt really heard or validated growing up. And he met his wife, she was listening to him for hours on end, and he felt like, wow, finally I found someone who would listen to me. That was, of course, in the romantic stage. Once they got married, he used to want to sit down and talk to her, and she couldn't sit for more than 5 minutes. And he was really offended. He felt really hurt. It's like, I thought you were I thought you loved me. I thought you cared about me. I thought you would listen to me. And there was just like a back and forth, and like she felt you're trying to control me. What, why do I have to sit and listen to you for all this time? Like, and it was a vicious cycle until they both realized where it was coming from. He realized his need to feel heard. She realized why it was so hard for her to listen because when she was a little girl, her father used to sit her down on her bed and sit with her for like 4 hours and and go on this monologue and reprimand her for whatever all the things that she did wrong. So for her, the thought of being confined and having to listen to somebody for an extended period of time was very threatening. But for him, he didn't understand that. He just felt ignored. So they could go through with that same dynamic through their relationship and begin to grow apart and have negative feelings towards each other. Once they become more aware of where it's coming from, then they both have the opportunity to shift. So, like for her, for example, for her to be able to listen will be an opportunity for her to grow and also help to meet his need of not feeling heard. And vice versa. There are issues that, let's say, that she needed from him that he wasn't able to give because of his own challenge. And if he were able to really hear that need and meet that need, her need would compel him to grow and become a better person. So it's kind of a win-win. The conflict is a win-win for both people if we can actually get out of the here and now, I would say the presenting symptoms that is happening now in the relationship, because it's always something bigger than that.
And I would also say that you would have to get out of that defensiveness, right? So if you feel criticized by the other person and I think what you're saying is that they might feel you will feel criticized because they're complaining about something that doesn't feel like it's such a big deal to you, but to them they have this background, sometimes referred to maybe as baggage, right? That from their own families of origin or whatever their previous experiences, and it's just landing really badly. And if they can get to a place where we're really talking about the need and the ability to give it and the ability to learn and grow each person to be able to meet the other person's need without feeling that defensiveness, because I think that can really come up and have create its own sort of toxic reaction in and of itself. What do you think of that?
Yeah, the defensiveness is a big challenge, and that's why couples really can't communicate because they feel offended. And when we feel unsafe and threatened, our natural instinct is to watch out for ourselves, to protect ourselves. And one of the most important things that we teach couples, and I share with couples all the time. I tell you this multiple times in our work together. Usually, when I work with a couple, I have them in for like a 2-day intensive or a group workshop. But we talk about a lot safety, and I have them repeat the word safety. That's what it's all about. If couples can be, or any individual, if we can be safe, feel safe, then we don't need to go into reactive mode. We can actually have the curiosity to listen to the other person, to understand where they're coming from and why it might be bothering them, as opposed to this automatic knee-jerk reaction. Oh, you said I did this, I didn't do that, and then it just
Well, and
escalates.
you did the other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you something about myself and my own marriage. I sometimes will feel like my husband is criticizing me, and then I'll get into that sort of defensive thing. And we came up with this idea that we would have this safe word, right? That we would say when something was happening, it's petunia. So, like, if we're driving somewhere together and he's asking me about something, and I start to feel like, wait, is he criticizing me? I'll be like, petunia, 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 petunia. And at least we laugh about it and we can kind of
Exactly.
figure out what it is that's going on. And I think that like it creates a little like I don't know release from the tension in the moment and gives us an opportunity to talk about what the petunia moment was.
No, that's a great idea because it gives you that release. It gives you're instead of being stuck in that defensiveness, all of a sudden you have a light moment. You can even laugh about it, and then you can talk about it from a more intentional way.
Exactly.
What's really
I know that you've coined the term relationship intelligence or RQ. What exactly is it? Because it sounds like we're kind of talking about it here. And let me know how it also shows up, like in basically in marriages and I guess also in professional settings.
So intelligence is all about kind of being aware of the other. That to be in a relationship means it's not all about you. It's about it's about you, but it's also about the other person. And learning how to be able to listen to the other person, to be able to acknowledge the other person, that they have a different perspective, to validate their perspective without having to agree with that. That's really it's powerful in every relationship, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in a business relationship because you're allowing other people's input and you're validating other people's input. And when you do that, it creates goodwill, it creates safety, it helps people meet in the workforce more productive, more willing to chip in, more willing to take a risk and to work better together. I mean, and of course, at home, it encourages people to be able to share, to be able to speak what they're really feeling instead of holding it up and being resentful. And it helps people feel heard and understood.
Great. I'm Catherine Miller, and you're listening to Divorce Dialogues, a podcast dedicated to educating people about divorce related topics so everyone can divorce with dignity. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts to be sure that you don't miss an episode. And I'm talking today with Rabbi Shlomo Slatkin about, well, marriage dynamics, relationship dynamics, and what can lead to resolution and what maybe doesn't lead to resolution. So, Rabbi Slatkin, too, for couples who are on the brink or feel that themselves on the brink of divorce, what do you think is often the most misunderstood about the conflict they're facing?
I think what's misunderstood, one of the things that's misunderstood is that your spouse is the problem. And I know and you're probably like, nobody wants to hear that if they're about to get divorced. Like, oh, what do you mean my spouse isn't the problem? Of course they're the problem. But what I encourage couples to do is to understand what is my role in this? What am I doing to contribute to this? Because that piece you're going to be taking with you in whatever relationship you go into. So it's really important to be totally aware and conscious of what you're doing before you make that decision. If you decide to get divorced, at least you do it from a place of consciousness, as opposed to this really hurts. I'm in so much pain. I need to run. I need to get out of here. And it makes sense why people would do that, but it's not going to serve you well, and it's not going to serve your children well because, as you know that you mentioned a lot, that children get in the middle. They become the bargaining chip. They're the ones who often suffer more than the couple, and it's not even their fault for all of this mess. And being aware of your role and being aware of why you're being triggered and why your spouse bothers you is much more important than what your spouse is doing to you and how they're the problem. And I think there's too much focus on blaming the other person than taking responsibility.
So, if there's somebody listening and they're wondering whether or not their marriage is worth saving, or if there's something they can do to make it savable, how can they help? How can you help them figure out whether or not this one can be saved or should be saved and one that shouldn't?
Sure. So ultimately, we leave that decision up to the couple. We would never, when I hear of therapists, they will recommend people to get divorced. That's not my job. I'm not in control of anyone else's life. The ramifications on both individuals, financially, emotionally, children, those are things that people have to take ownership for. But what we do is that we help couples be able to, when we work with couples in our intensives or workshops, we help them learn about relationships. We learn that, first of all, that, as I mentioned in the beginning, that the power struggle is inevitable. It's not a proof that you're in the wrong relationship. And if you study the power struggle and become conscious of what's bothering you, you can actually realize that you're in the right relationship and you just need to do the work to be able to heal. So that's one thing. Another thing is just learning about our past, learning about, as we mentioned, the baggage that we bring to the relationship, because that's what's usually getting triggered. We say if it's hysterical, it's historical. Anything that's really bothering you in your relationship is usually something old, usually your old stuff. So we encourage couples to be able to explore that, to understand where it's coming from, what's bothering them, why it's bothering them, so that they can make a conscious decision. And they'll know really what it is they need to do to make this relationship work. Now, obviously, if you have one partner that's not committed, it's going to be harder. But we find that when couples get together, we've seen couples that actually say, like, "We're coming just to get divorced. We just need some help working things out." And by the end, one of them is already like, "Well, I don't want to get divorced anymore. I actually, want to work on this." And that becomes challenging when one person's not on the same page. But the idea is that becoming aware of what's going on, becoming more conscious, making a conscious decision, and then you can say at the end, you know what, let's give it a shot. I think that we can make this work. I finally feel like you can understand me. I understand why I've been bothered by you for so many years. We can finally communicate differently now. We feel safe with each other. All of these things are possible for a couple that wants to reconcile, and then a couple that decides that they don't want to reconcile. At least they have skills to communicate. They're not holding the other person kind of in their head rent free, full of resentment, taking it out on the children. They're able to do it in a more amicable way, which is it's good for everybody. It's good for the people who are getting divorced, and it's good for much better for the children if things can be done that way. So we kind of view our role as that helping people get clarity so that they can make the decision and they can decide, do I want to put in the work or not? If they don't, at least they can try to move forward in a more peaceful manner.
So imagine there's a listener and they're really pissed off at their spouse. There's smoke coming out of their ears all the time, and they're with you and they're thinking, wait a second, listening to this, listening to you here today, maybe there's something I can do to not be so pissed off all the time. Well, how do you help someone who's like that? Or maybe I'm overstating it a little bit, but who really finds themselves really stuck in that place of blame and anger all the time to make the shift you're talking about?
Well, first we ask them, we gently help guide them to explore their past, to explore their childhood, explore the hurts that they have in relationship. And once they do that, they start to realize this is very familiar. Or we might even ask more directly as we talk about what's bothering them with their spouse. And what this reminds me of from my childhood is, and then when they take a moment and like, oh my goodness, I can't believe like this is exactly what my mother or my father used to do to me. It's a
Yeah.
big aha moment for people, but just even a lot of people aren't even aware of that. They don't even think about it. So even just introducing that concept to them and having them explore that, they start to discover there's a lot more there beneath that anger that they have towards their spouse than they think.
Rabbi, was there a moment in your own personal journey that made you realize that breakdowns could be breakthroughs?
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few. I would say in the beginning of our relationship, about 2 years in, when we had our first child, we were in a place of, I would say, crisis, and we went to get help ourselves. And even though it's like we weren't expecting it, we thought everything would be great, but it turned out to forever change our relationship. And we even had another one, like a little bit later on, midway to the in our relationship. But it also served as scary as it was, and almost even got to the point where you know things were going worse than ever. I think that what it did was it served to strengthen the relationship. It served to strengthen our commitment towards each other, and it helped us learn a lot about some of our baggage that we weren't really addressing, and what we both needed to do to step up and be better partners.
I bet that going through that yourself really helped you help other couples better. I know that my own divorce really gave me a lot of compassion and empathy for the people I work with, and I'm sure that experience did a similar thing for you.
For sure. You can't compare like learning something in school and then actually like experiencing it, knowing what your clients or your couples are going through and being able to empathize and also having the confidence that they can, at least in my line of work, ideally trying to help people stay together if that's what they want, to believe that they can actually do it. Because I think that that's so important because couples are coming in, they don't have a lot of hope, they don't have a lot of confidence. And my job is to hold the hope for them. I really believe in them. I believe that if they did fall in love once upon a time, that they can make it work if they're both committed. And that really helps set the energy for both of them to do the work and to realize, oh wow, like we can really do this. And so I definitely find it invaluable that I went through it. And, sometimes I feel like, maybe we went through this so we could help other people. That's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, that's lovely. You're listening to the Divorce Dialogues podcast, and I'm Catherine Miller. Divorce Dialogues has been educating people about divorce and relationship issues for over 10 years. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and don't forget to check out our previous episodes on the podcast website, divorcedialogues.com. And I'm talking today with Rabbi Shlomo Slatkin about marriage issues and resolution. And Rabbi, if people want to learn more about you or your marriage workshops, how can they do that?
Sure. You can visit www.themarriagerestorationproject.com, themarriagerestorationproject.com. And we offer private 2-day intensives for couples that are kind of on the brink. They want to make a decision. They're not sure where to go, which way to go. We're here to help give them that clarity. We have support afterwards as well. We also have group workshops as well in different locations and virtually. So we're happy to reach out to us if you have any questions. We're happy to help you in your journey.
So I know that there are a lot of conflicts. The same human walks around in life, and the conflict that shows up in the bedroom sometimes also shows up in the boardroom or wherever they happen to be working. And I know that you also work with people in professional environments. So what are the similarities and how do you see that?
So the similarities, I mean, just the same, you don't have like the same, the romantic love and that connection that couples have, but what you do
But
have,
you might spend more time with the people at work than you do
uh,
with your
you
spouse.
probably actually do. You
Yeah.
probably actually do. But what you do is we have the same, it's the same human, the same brain, the same need for safety, the same need to feel heard, to be seen, and the same triggers. And sometimes it's the same triggers that you have from your own personal, situation, your own past baggage and relationships are going to be triggered by certain personalities at work. And how do you deal with them? How do you learn? How do you not react? How do you learn how to share what you're feeling in a way where it can come across in a positive way as opposed to come across as a criticism? I mean, these basic communication skills and the basic reactivity and lack of safety and the need for safety are totally so important. I know that there was a term that was coined, I would say recently, so somewhat recently, called psychological safety. I mean, we've been talking about this in the work I've been doing for, I've been doing this for 20 years, even before that, in terms of the imago therapy that I do, safety, a relationship safety, and psychological safety. There's studies that are seen in the workplace that it's necessary. People need to feel safe to be a part of a team. People need to feel safe to be able to to contribute. Because if a person feels unsafe, they're going to be a little bit timid. They're not going to want to contribute. They're going to feel like, worried about the reaction of their boss or their coworker. So the same skills
Yeah.
done with couples are extremely effective in helping people be able to relate to each other, to resolve conflict, and to communicate better in the workplace.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what psychological safety is, because I can imagine people, listeners, wondering. I mean, I'm not physically at risk, but I don't. But so, can you tell us what you mean by psychological safety and what the building blocks are for a psychologically safe relationship, either, in marriage, in a relationship, or at work?
Sure. So, the brain, we like to explain the brain as three parts called the triune brain. So we talk about you have the brain stem, that's the part of your brain that regulates your breathing and basic bodily functions. We call it the reptilian brain. It's like a reptile, doesn't have any emotions, just kind of a visceral reaction. You have the limbic system, the emotional part of your brain, and then you have the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain where there's logic and problem solving. When the brain is under stress, the brain goes into that more primitive part of the brain stem, the limbic system. It's not really accessing the prefrontal cortex. So when you're under stress, compromising, problem solving, logic kind of goes out the window. So stress makes a person feel unsafe. And if someone criticizes you at work, if someone is not nice to you, you're going to be a little bit on guard. And the brain is wired to protect ourselves. We have a negativity bias. We are looking and scanning the environment for danger. And anything that seems dangerous for us, and some things, I guess some people are more sensitive than others, but anything that feels dangerous to us is going to put our brain in that very reactive place. So we need that psychological safety in order to be able to get from that reactive place to a more functioning, that prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain that's going to be able to cooperate, going to be able to problem solve, to work together, to articulate what we need. So that's why it's so important. How we achieve it is learning how to be more intentional, learning how to ask for permission to share instead of just kind of bombarding people, learning how to listen by not reacting but just either being quiet or even we teach people to mirror back, to repeat back what the other person said. So instead of just interjecting ourselves, well, I don't agree with you, that's not true. What I heard you say is, you think that this would be a better plan for this project. Did I get that? Can you tell me more about that? And just listening to a person until they're finished. That is a way for them to feel safe. That is a way for them to feel like they can share and they have what they say matters. And because if you start reacting, if you start picking apart what they're saying, they're just going to shut down. And, next time they're probably not going to give any of their brilliant ideas because they know that you're not really interested in them. So it's all about working on your reactivity, being more intentional, asking for permission, and of course, how you sharing in a way that's, using I statements, taking ownership for what you're feeling, not yelling or screaming, not blaming or shaming, removing kind of the toxicity in the talk. Those are all ways to create a more psychologically safe environment where people can show up fully and contribute and work together.
Yeah, what you mentioned imago therapy a few minutes ago, and then what some of the techniques that you're talking about here sound very imago therapy like to me. And when I have people come in to get divorced in mediation or even just in collaborative law or negotiation, whatever, when they've been through imago therapy, first of all, they almost never litigate because they have had that opportunity to at least figure out how to talk to each other. So, Rabbi, could you tell the listeners what is imago therapy and what's the sort of concept behind it so people understand a little bit more what you're talking about?
Sure. So imago therapy is really if imago means image, and the theory is that we have an unconscious image of our ideal partner. We don't just fall in love with someone by accident. There's a reason unconsciously why we're attracted to our partner, and that's because they remind us of the positive and negative characteristics of our parents. So we say that marriage is the unfinished business of childhood. We're actually looking to find someone who's going to remind us of our childhood. So why on earth would anyone want to do that if they had a bad childhood? Because marriage is the unfinished business of childhood and it's for the purpose of growth and healing. So finding someone who's going to push your buttons is going to enable you to kind of do it over and get it right this time. So if you're able to feel safe and conscious and talk about what's going on, then your spouse can understand why what you're doing bothers them. If you're not going to be conscious, if you're not going to feel safe, then it's just going to feel like a criticism and then they're going to get reactive. So one of the great things is people understand with Imago, they understand the source of their conflict. They understand that it's usually coming from the childhood, and they understand that their parents are triggering them. And this helps twofold. Let's see, it helps me understand that if I'm reacting, it's more about my own baggage than what my spouse is doing. It's like, 10% what they're doing, that's the trigger, but it's 90% my stuff. And it also helps them have more compassion. Instead of feeling criticized when I say you don't listen to me, my wife can realize, oh, like that makes a lot of sense because that's how you grow up like that. So I understand why you're kind of overreactive. I would say just having a disproportionate response to what the comment that I made. So it changes that whole dynamic. It helps us also see that I kind of alluded to it before about the stages of relationship. There is a romantic stage, there's a power struggle, but there's also what we call the conscious marriage, real love, meaning that the power struggle is a means towards an end. It's an opportunity to use that conflict to create connection. And then finally, as I talked about safety, it's a very structured process to help us create safety so we can communicate. I had a very like a high-powered executive that I worked with, and the couple wasn't sure if they wanted to stay together. And I worked with them for 2 days, and we were setting up our first session, and they said, you know what, a follow-up session. They said, we actually decided to get divorced, but this was extremely helpful to us because we don't have to go to the lawyers. They said they don't have to litigate because they know how to talk now. Finally, they learn how to talk after 30, 40 years. They learn how to
Yeah.
talk. So if that's what we're trying to help people do. We're trying to help people learn how to communicate, learn how to feel safe with each other. And the outcome is going to be up to them what they want to do. But even in the case where they do want to get divorced, it's definitely going to be helpful for them moving forward, not only in the relationship, but all relationships as human beings.
Yeah. And I can second that as a divorce lawyer. That is totally, totally true. That is definitely the experience that we have here in the office. All right, Rabbi, we only have a couple minutes left, but I'm wondering, you are a rabbi, and how faith and spirituality informs the work that you do with people in helping them rebuild and establish trust and connection.
Right. Well, I work with couples from all different backgrounds. So some people come because they want a non-religious marriage retreat, and some people want something more religious. So I'm really mindful of that. But at least for the ones who are interested, or just for me as a clinician, and one of the things that struck me when I did this work personally was that it just it made so much sense to me that first of all, that conflict is an opportunity for healing. That it's not just bad news. That there's nothing that's coincidental in the universe. That everything, from a faith perspective, God calls the couple to come together, and even if there's a purpose for it, and even if they decide not to stay together for whatever reason, there's also a purpose for that. But a lesson that we can learn. So it's just looking. I think that the faith perspective helps people be able to see that there's something deeper going on in life. It's not just the way the world looks on the surface level, but there's always something deeper, and there's always an opportunity for something positive to come out of even the most negative situations. And I think that hope is really helpful for couples. And when people have faith, it helps them. And even if they don't, at least for me and my belief in what can happen for the couple, it can be helpful, even if I don't express it to them.
Yeah, holding the hope for the relationship you said before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, Rabbi Shlomo Slatkin, thank you so much for being my guest. It's really been an interesting conversation.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate it.